everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jane Eyre Project, the video series in which I read Jane Eyre related works and tell you what I think about them. If you would like to watch this series from episode 1, I have linked a playlist on both the screen and in the description below. Also in the description, I'll put anything else fun that has to do with this series because sometimes I have little extra tidbits to share with you. Let us just jump into what I will be reading in this episode. So in this episode, I'm going to be reading The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fford. This is the first book in the Thursday Next series. I feel like it's pretty safe to say that this is going to be a spoiler-free video this time, only because I think that Jane Eyre in this book is going to be more of a plot device. So unlike what I've done with a few of the previous episodes, I don't have to dive into the different perspectives of Jane Eyre characters or Jane Eyre herself and do anything that's going to be spoilery. This is a book set in a alternate timeline, 1985, that's very futuristic, so time travel is a thing, etc., etc. And basically, literature is taken super seriously. You're not allowed to mess with classic literature. And also, it sounds like you can kind of directly engage with literary characters. The main character in the series centers around a character named Thursday Next, who is a special operative in the, what is it called? Literary detection, it says on the back of the book. And basically what happens in this novel is that Jane Eyre gets kidnapped from the novel, and then Thursday Next basically has to track down the criminal that stole her and return Jane Eyre to the Bronte novel. Now, I actually picked this book out long ago, like probably in the early 2000s, but I never actually ended up picking it up and reading it. I've heard that it's like a wacky mix of genres with a lot of humor to it, which if executed right could be a really awesome thing and right up my alley. This is the first time that I'm actually going to be listening to an audiobook for this series. So it is Monday night. I'm gonna dive into this during the evening and let you know what I think once I've gotten this started. I'm probably going to read it in print first and then on like work days, audiobook. I don't feel like getting my little filming light, so I'm trying to use my desk lamp light. So if I look weird, that's why. I kind of look like I have a glowing halo. It's just kind of odd. Anyway, I'm babbling because I'm tired and it's after work in the nighttime and I really need to shower off my dance and musical theater teaching moment. But I wanted to drop in and tell you what I thought of the first 3 chapters. So I read 1 chapter in print and then I listened to 2 more chapters in audiobook. Quite liking the audiobook. Really excellent, like British reader for it. As with most sort of science fiction books, you do have to give it a second. I'm still kind of in that give it a second mood because you obviously got to learn all the ins and outs of the world that's being presented. And when I was getting into the tone of the book, because it has kind of a specific tone, I was like, what does this remind me of? Now, one thing that it reminds me of, which is maybe kind of an odd thought, but it weirdly reminds me of the movie Charade, the Audrey Hepburn movie, which is one of my favorite movies. So I think I'm going to enjoy this book, where it's kind of like a comedy, but also a mystery. It has kind of a semi-wackiness like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if it's going to get quite as wacky as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I think it might fit in that kind of realm of a tone. I also think that this book is going to have kind of a Sherlock Holmes vibe because the villain was introduced and he kind of gives me these like Moriarty vibes. Hilarious side note, this book is literally falling apart. Yeah. So hopefully I won't lose any pages. I asked my mom about it and I was like, Mom, why is this book falling apart? And she's like, I don't know. All I did was read this book twice. I guess maybe the binding just couldn't take the 2 readings. These 2 pages are just not gonna stay in this book. So luckily I have it in audiobook just in case I lose those 2 pages. Excited to read chapter 4. Excited to roll into more of like the actual case. that Thursday has been chosen for. So I've completed chapter 9 of the book, and I'm still really enjoying it. It's still really fast-paced, which I think is really great. I like that it has short chapters. It really moves along. There's already been a lot of action in the first 100 pages. Now, it hasn't deeply gotten into the Jane Eyre element, but it has started introducing what's kind of going on. Apparently, it's a book that Thursday is really familiar with and has read many times, and it saves her life both literally and figuratively. However, I was intrigued to discover that in this alternate history, Jane Eyre does not play out the way it does in the book that we, the reader, think of as Jane Eyre, which I think there may be a reason for that, maybe giving the character Thursday the ability to like change what happens in the book. I'm really glad that I waited to pick up this book. I actually have more knowledge on like some of the inside sort of literary jokes because of that. For example, like the Baconian debate on whether Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays or whether it was Sir Francis Bacon. By the way, in my personal opinion, I don't really care if Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays. I just like that the plays exist. However, I do love the debate. I like hearing both sides of the debate and like what people's arguments are. There's not only Sir Francis Bacon that's also up for the debate on who wrote Shakespeare's plays if it wasn't Shakespeare. And so I do find that an interesting thing that I've watched a couple of documentaries about. So I really got like nerd-tastic on that little moment that was included. I am also finding Thursday's veteran background an interesting element to the story, and also the war aspect of it. So it seems like this is going to have a political thriller kind of aspect. Died laughing. I wondered why on the front cover it said it's one of the things that it says that it combines and the elements of it is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I was like, why are they saying that? I get kind of tonally why it's saying that, but I also laughed so hard because Thursday ran into this character who was named Spike, and he works for the division in Special Ops as like a werewolf and vampire kind of person. Like that's what his work is, and he's British. So yeah, I think the Buffy reference on the cover is intentional. So yesterday my dip powder nail just fell off, and I have no makeup on because my allergies are a living hell. So yay. Yeah, my sinuses, if I sound stuffy, are just not happy. But I'm not sick because I don't have a fever, and it's just like stuffy nose. So it's red, and my eye circles look scary, and I'm very, very sorry. But this is the reason why it's Saturday, and I have not progressed as much as I would have liked through this. However, I am really determined to like edit a video for this channel today, so I want to at least start on that, and then I hopefully will be able to pick this up more over the weekend. The real reason though I did this update, even though I don't have a heck ton to say, is that I had to tell you a hilarious joke from this book, which was, why is a raven like a writing desk? Because Poe wrote on both. I literally told my parents this, and my mom laughed really hard, and my dad was like, Honestly, I wish I had read this on a vacation or something where I could just like binge read it, because it is such a mix of genres. I wouldn't say that it's like a hard to read book. Like, it's very easy to read, but there are a lot of elements to it because it's such a mixture of genres. And so thus, when I like leave the world of this book, sometimes getting back into it is a little bit of a challenge, or I feel like I've forgotten some elements. I do have a question. I'm mid chapter 12. There's no chapter 13. There's just this blank page. It seems like the page count is correct. So I hope that this book explains the lack of chapter 13. Is it just because 13 is an unlucky number? I don't know. And because I can't wait to share my book mail with you, I did get the next book that I'm going to read for this project in the mail today. Jane. I'll tell you more about Jane by Patricia Park at the end of the video, but I just wanted to share it with you. My weekend and my Monday were kind of lost to the allergy season. So yeah, it's now Tuesday. I'm almost done with the book. I'm not quite done with the book. The goal was to finish it by Monday, but I think I will at least have it done by tomorrow morning because I only have 2 more hours left in the audiobook. Although I have been reading it mostly in print, I did listen to a lot of the audiobook today because that's what worked. It's confirmed. This has no chapter 13. So if you are listening to it in audiobook or switching back and forth like me, know that it has no chapter 13. So you have to kind of accommodate for that in the audiobook when you want to switch back and forth. I haven't heard a lot from the Jane Eyre aspect of this in a little bit of a while, just because mostly it's been action, dealing with the villainousness of the villain and dealing with some inner office politics going on. But I have gotten a lot of laughs. There has been a lot of Shakespeare, and I like Shakespeare too. So I've appreciated all that. I would recommend having like a gist of a knowledge about Shakespeare maybe before checking this out. I will say the fact that I have not completed a Charles Dickens book other than A Christmas Carol has made me lost on certain plot points. Although they do explain them in the book, Charles Dickens's writing is quite verbose, and so I've had trouble getting past his I was paid by wordness in the duration of my life. So that's why I have not finished anything other than A Christmas Carol, and that's why I go, who is this Dickens character? What? So although there hasn't been a lot of Jane Eyre, I actually kind of understand why there isn't a lot featured in this book, and I do think it is because it is the first book in the series, and it's like introducing characters and like the world and things like that, and that's kind of like the main focus more than the Jane Eyre aspect. So as I said at the front of the video, I do think that all that stuff is more of a plot device. So I'm not actually surprised that there's not a ton of Jane Eyre in this, but I am excited because I do think in this last bit we're gonna get quite a lot of that and a little bit of action and drama surrounding it. I do think though that it's my food delivery service has arrived, so that's why my dog's barking. Yeah, we're gonna get some meals. I've got to pull that in a second here. I do think it's interesting that the few Jane Eyre elements that have been injected have been Mr. Rochester focused, which is amusing because that was the last book I read, Mr. Rochester. So I guess I have like a nice symmetry with the things that I've picked to read or the order that I've chosen. So I will probably go ahead and finish this and then update you when the book is done. Alrighty, friends. So my mom's doing a vocal lesson right now. So if you hear talking and or singing, that's what the scoop is in the other room. Just something that might happen. I completed the Eyre Affair. I waited a little while to kind of get my final thoughts together and my rating. But before I jump into my rating and my final thoughts, I wanted to talk about the last quarter of the book. So the last quarter of the book is where the Jane Eyre stuff really starts to roll. Considering that is part of the summary, you would think that it would happen a little closer to the middle of the book, but I do think that is, like I said in a previous update, because they are establishing world building and more of a series-esque kind of vibe with the story. So I think that's why it doesn't come into later. However, it is worth the wait, I think, because all the Jane Eyre stuff is really amusing. It's really fun to me that the characters in Jane Eyre know that they're characters in the book. Like, they're not like just going, what do you mean we're characters in a book? They know that they are characters in a novel, and that really makes any kind of interaction they have with the characters that are in Thursday Next World very, very fun. And and just also creates some discussions that are really amusing. The most hilarious part of the characters knowing that they are characters in the book is that Rochester has opinions about St. John Rivers, and they are priceless gold. And the only reason I say that they are priceless gold is because my mom and I for like 3 weeks have been discussing how every time we reread Jane Eyre, St. John Rivers gets more and more annoying. Almost to the point where I'm like, really, Jane, I know he's your cousin, but did you really have to give him part of your money? Because he's that irritating to me at this point. His whole personality is a mood that I just don't enjoy. And apparently Rochester and I agree on this statement. I do also think that the author of this book did a really good job at depicting those characters and letting them fit in kind of the wonderful chaos that is this book, while still making Jane feel like Jane and Rochester feel like Rochester. I also thought it was really clever how some of Thursday's plot started to mirror the plot of Jane Eyre in little ways and in tidbits. So they're little Easter eggs that you can find throughout the book. It may not be like a large part of the plot, but the book does really hinge on the reader knowing a lot of literary references, but in this case, at least knowing the general gist of the plot of Jane Eyre. So even if you haven't read Jane Eyre, you probably should at least know the general plot from beginning to end so that you can see what happens throughout the story and what is going on and how it ties to Thursday's journey. You know what? I'm not 100% sure how I feel about Thursday's romantic life, though, but her other elements of her life are so good that it balances any other thoughts that I have about that out. So I guess I'll just leave it at that idea. I'm actually quite glad that I decided to complete at least part of this in audiobook, because I realized that this copy of the book that I have that is dilapidated is actually missing maybe 3 to 5 pages of the end of the book. And I never would have known, because the last sentence on this page actually feels like the end of the book when I read it, but it is in fact not. And that stuff is actually kind of important because it's stuff that's going to roll over into setting up the next book in the Thursday Next series. So considering that I do at some point probably want to continue on with at least the second book in the series, I'm glad that I audiobooked it so that I knew that those words indeed existed. Singing and some kind of machinery going on outside. Don't you love filming in summer? So moving on to my final thoughts, I'm going to start with my rating. I decided to go with a 4.75 rating, which is very close, of course, to 5 stars. I didn't quite give it 5 stars, and the only reason for that is because it is more of a plot-driven narrative than a character-driven narrative, and I just prefer character-driven narrative over plot-driven narrative. Ideally, if you can do both, do both. However, it's very well executed. I still think there's a lot of meat there, but I don't think it's the kind of story that is meant to be character-driven just by the nature of it kind of having a film noir mystery vibe on top of the comedic element. I did round it up to 5 stars on Goodreads because I think it deserved a round up. It's one of the few comedic books that I've really enjoyed in a long time, because sometimes comedy in books doesn't really hit with me, especially if it's parody or satire, but this one really worked for me. I don't know if it's because I like British humor, so if you like British humor, you will probably also enjoy this, or if it's just because the jokes are more my kind of vibe. Like, they're not forced comedy. They're kind of based on situations that the characters find themselves in, or puns, or having like funny character names that reoccur and make you laugh every time the names are said, or the literary jokes, which if you like, probably most of the people watching this are a super reader, especially if you like classic lit or something like that, you will feel like you're like in on the jokes. So it's not overtly trying to be funny. It's trying to just create like chaos that's brilliant, and then if you find something funny, it's extra good. The dialogue is really punchy and really concise, and the action is really well described and excellently amusing, as well as very page turning, if you will. And now that I've told you most of my thoughts on The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fford, I'm going to briefly chat about the book that I want to read next. I already revealed the book that I was planning to read because I couldn't help it. I got book mail. I was excited, as you saw. So I'm going to be reading Jane by Patricia Park in the next video. And from what I understand, it is a modern retelling set in New York City, and it's coming from a Korean American perspective because Jane Eyre is the main character and she is Korean American. Look for that video near the end of May and we will check out Jane together. I can't tell you yet until I dive into the book whether that video is going to be spoiler free or not. We're just going to have to dive into that vlog, and I'll tell you at the beginning of the video if it's going to be spoiler free or not. That is it for this episode of the Jane Eyre Project. If you feel so led, please leave me a comment, even if it's just to say hi below. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm if you leave comments, and of course likes and whatever else you would like to do to contribute. And that is it for the video. I will see you later. Bye!